Hi again. We're going to finish the Twits, and then there are some pages to work on there. I think you already started. 4, 5, and 6 are describing um, using some character traits. We're going to talk about adjectives if we didn't already. So I'm on page 66. It's called The Ravens Swoop Over. They had only just finished the job when the roly-poly bird came sweeping in, screaming, "They're coming back! They're coming back!" Quickly, the birds flew back onto the roof of the house. The monkeys rushed into their cage and stood upside down, one on top of the other. A moment later, Mr. and Mrs. Twit came marching into the garden, each carrying a fearsome-looking gun. "I'm glad to see those monkeys are still upside down," said Mr. Twit. "They're too stupid to do anything else," said Mrs. Twit. "Hey, look at all those cheeky birds still up there on the roof. Let's go inside and load our lovely new guns, and then it'll be bang, 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 and bird pie for supper." Just as Mr. and Mrs. Twit were about to enter the house, the two black ravens swooped over their heads. Each bird carried a paintbrush in its claw, and each paintbrush was smeared with sticky glue. As the ravens whizzed over, they brushed a streak of sticky glue onto the tops of Mr. and Mrs. Twit's heads. They did it with the lightest touch, but even so, the Twits both felt it. "What was that?" cried Mrs. Twit. "Some beastly bird has dropped its dirty droppings on my head." "On mine too," shouted Mr. Twit. "I felt it. I felt it." "Don't touch it," cried Mrs. Twit. "You'll get it all over your hands. Come inside and we'll wash it off at the sink." "The filthy, dirty brutes!" yelled Mr. Twit. "I'll bet they did it on purpose. Just wait till I've loaded up my gun." Mrs. Twit got the key from under the doormat, where Mugglewump had carefully replaced it, and into the house they went. The Twits are turned upside down. "What's this?" gasped Mr. Twit as they entered the living room. "What's happened?" screamed Mrs. Twit. They stood in the middle of the room looking up. All the furniture, the big table, the chairs, the sofa, the lamps, the little side tables, the cabinets with bottles of beer on it, the ornaments, the electric heater, the carpet. Everything was stuck upside down to the ceiling. The pictures were upside down on the walls. And the floor they were standing on was absolutely bare. And what's more, it had been painted white to look like the ceiling. So if you're not looking at your book now, here are the Twits, and all their things are upside down. Remember, they're not the smartest people. "Look!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "That's the floor! The floor's up there! This is the ceiling! We are standing on the ceiling!" "We're upside down," gasped Mr. Twit. "We must be upside down. We are standing on the ceiling, looking down at the floor." "Oh, help!" screamed Mrs. Twit. "Help, help, help! I'm beginning to feel giddy." So am I, cried Mr. Twit. "I don't like this one little bit." "We're upside down and all the blood is going to my head," screamed Mrs. Twit. "If we don't do something quickly, I shall die. I know I will." "I've got it," cried Mr. Twit. "I know what we'll do. We'll stand on our heads. Then anyway, we'll be the right way up." So they stood on their heads, and of course, the moment the tops of their heads touched the floor, the sticky glue that the ravens had brushed on a few moments before did its job. They were stuck. They were pinned down, cemented, glued, fixed to the floorboards. Through a crack in the door, the monkeys watched. They jumped right out of the cage the moment the Twits had gone inside, and the roly-poly bird watched, and all the other birds flew in and out to catch a glimpse of this extraordinary sight. The monkeys escape. I'm on page 72. That evening, Mugglewump and his family went up to the big woods on top of the hill, and in the tallest tree of all, they built a marvelous tree house. All the birds, especially the big ones, the crows and rooks and magpies, made their nests around the tree, the tree house so that nobody could see it from the ground. You can't stay up here forever, you know, the roly-poly bird said. Why not? Asked Mugglewump. It's a lovely place. Just you wait till the winter comes, the roly-poly bird said. Monkeys don't like cold weather, do they? They most certainly don't, cried Mugglewump. Are the winters so very cold over here? It's all snow and ice, said the roly-poly bird. Sometimes it gets so cold a bird will wake up in the morning with his feet frozen to the boughs that he's been roosting on. So a bough is a branch. Then what shall we do? Cried Mugglewump. My family will all be deep freezed. No, they won't, said the roly-poly bird, because when the first leaves start falling from the trees in the autumn, you can fly home to Africa with me. Don't be ridiculous, Mugglewump said. Monkeys can't fly. You can sit on my back, said the roly-poly bird. I shall take you one at a time. You will travel by roly-poly superjet, and it won't cost you a penny. Last chapter, the Twits get the shrinks. And down here in the horrid house, Mr. and Mrs. Twit are still stuck upside down to the floor of the living room. It's all your fault, yelled Mr. Twit, thrashing his legs in the air. You're the one, you ugly old cow, who went hopping around shouting, we're upside down, we're upside down. And you're the one who said to stand on our heads so we'd be the right way up, you whiskery old warthog, screamed Mrs. Twit. Now we'll never get free. We're stuck here forever. You may be stuck here forever, said Mr. Twit, but not me. I'm going to get away. Mr. Twit wiggled and squirmed, and he squiggled and wormed, and he twisted and turned, and he choggled and churned, but the sticky glue held him to the floor just as tightly as it had once held the poor birds in the big dead tree. He was still as upside down as ever, standing on his head. But heads are not made to be stood upon. If you stand on your head for a very long time, the horrid thing happens. And this was where Mr. Twit got his biggest shock of all. With so much weight on it from up above, his head began to get squashed into his body. Quite soon, it had disappeared completely, sunk out of sight into the fatty folds of his flabby neck. If you look at page 75, you can see a picture of this. I'm shrinking, burbled Mr. Twit. So am I, cried Mrs. Twit. Help me. Save me. Call a doctor, yelled Mr. Twit. I'm getting the dreaded shrinks. And so he was. Mrs. Twit was getting the dreaded shrinks, too. And this time it wasn't a fake. It was the real thing. Their heads shrank into their necks, and then their necks began shrinking into their bodies, and their bodies began shrinking into their legs, and their legs began shrinking into their feet. And 1 week later, on a nice sunny afternoon, a man called Fred came around to read the gas meter. When nobody answered the door, Fred peeped into the house, and there he saw on the floor of the living room 2 bundles of old clothes, 2 pairs of shoes, and a walking stick. There was nothing more left in this world of Mr. and Mrs. Twit. And everyone, including Fred, shouted, "Hooray!" And that was the end of the Twits. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that book. I thought it was kind of funny. And I read it every year with my class. So, work in your packet, and I will see you at our Zoom meeting tomorrow. Bye, everybody.